Greetings to you at the Palliative Care Congress of Bolivia. My name is Sport Barber, and I am a chaplain and a spiritual care director in hospice in the United States. It is a real privilege to talk with you today from the state of Idaho, where I would much rather be present with you all in person today. Because in 2019, my wife Erica and I moved to the beautiful city of Tarija. And we found a home out in the countryside of La Victoria, where we lived for 5 years. And eventually, out in La Victoria, I became known as El Gringo de La Victoria, and I like that. So Erica and I had abandoned our careers in order to help move her parents from Virginia back to their homeland of Bolivia. They had been apart from Bolivia for almost 50 years. And Erica's father had a wish. He wanted to breathe his native air once again in his life. We determined to try to figure out how to help make that happen. And we wanted him to once again be surrounded by this familiar sights of his beautiful land. We wanted him to hear the distinctive music of Bolivia, its familiar smells, its variety of foods. All of it signified a real important return for him. It reminds me of a principle that I see often in my work, which is that sometimes in life, as in grief, we have to go backwards before we can effectively move forwards. So Erica and I, we made an exploratory trip to Bolivia, the place where she was born, tried to determine the best place for her parents to live. And we found Tarija to be perfect in geography and in climate and in elevation. It had enough of an infrastructure that we knew that we could care for her parents' needs in the latter years of their lives. So with my 10 years of hospice experience and Erica's 20 plus years in public health, we determined to create our own in-home palliative care system for her parents. And we began to interview nurses and a doctor to care for Erica's mother, who has advanced Alzheimer's disease. And then we trained the nurses and doctor in palliative care principles in palliative medicine. In conjunction with the rest of the family, Erica's mother is now living her best Alzheimer's disease-filled life. She has 24-hour care, 7 days a week, from 3 nurses and a doctor. She does not go 1 minute of a day without a trained professional right by her side. She is fully dependent on her activities of daily living. She can stand up, but she cannot walk without assistance, without falling. She needs help with all personal cares. She cannot feed herself, but she has the support she needs. Her pain is well managed. Traditional side effects of Alzheimer's disease are minimized with appropriate medications, and she is eating healthier than ever before. And thanks to the careful meal planning and creating by our brother David and sister-in-law Yenny, it appears as though our mother no longer has diabetes. She is pleasant in soul and in spirit. She feels safe. She's in her own home, surrounded by her husband, her son and daughter-in-law, and a caregiving team of professionals. And we are so very grateful. It was only at the end of our 5 years in Tarija that I met a gentleman named Peter, and he introduced us to Marcella, who is with us today. And we met Marcella the night before our departure from Bolivia. And we were so excited to hear about the reports that she gave us of the development of palliative care in Bolivia. Well, that was 2 years ago that we left Bolivia, and we moved to Geneva, Switzerland for 6 months, where Erica continued her career with the World Health Organization, and after which we moved back to Idaho, and for me to resume my prior work in spiritual care or care of the soul in hospice. So that is us. Nice to meet you. Many of us here today experience our interest in palliative care as a form of calling. There's a prompt from deep within, somewhere deep within ourselves, to engage with the experience of assisting people who are having extraordinary pain or symptoms due to disease, perhaps more directly engage with the experience of death or of dying. And if we're honest, that usually is emerging as part of a spiritual work for ourselves, but it is also in service to others. We intuitively or experientially know that death and birth are like peak experiences of life. We often talk about them as bookends of life. You're born and you die. And these experiences are peak experiences in our spiritual journey, and they provide times of coming closer to wonder about our experience, or to observe the mystery of our experience, or to seek more understanding about our experience of life. Well, walking with people at the end of life, or if you've ever walked at the end of life with a loved one, you know that it is one of the most tender of times. It rivals a baby being born. There's so much anticipation, planning, decorating, dreaming, hopes and dreams of a life ahead of this young child. The baby is born and is handled with such tenderness and care because they are totally dependent upon their parents or the caregivers for life itself. And we know that how those initial needs are met for a baby, even in the initial hours or days, actually imprint on the psyche of a baby with information about how they're going to need to move through this world. So in contrast, at the end of life, there's a tendency in our cultures to view it with dread. We hypothesize or think if you plan for it, it must mean that you want to die. Or if you talk about it, it means that you will die. Or if I don't plan for it, maybe it won't happen to me. And so we generally do not decorate for it. Dreams about it are usually referred to as nightmares. And any tendency toward hope easily dissolves into fears. Well, I would like to paint a different picture today of what care for people at the end of their life can be like. As caregivers, we have the opportunity to provide a compassion. We have the opportunity to express a tenderness toward those approaching death that is not too dissimilar from what we do at childbirth. Except at the end of life, we get to explore on the tail end of life all of those things that happened in life, the hopes and the dreams of an individual's life. We get to learn about how they lived their life and how this person loved and where they lived and even what they believed and how their life intersected with the world around them, the relationships that they have formed in their life. I like when we refer to this as kind of a spiritual midwifing, being with the individual through the process of dying and their loved ones is an opportunity to be deeply present, to witness, to help create an environment for finding meaning, for finding comfort, providing connection, a profound connection in an intimate solitude. It is a sacred work. It is a sacred gift, and we enter it with that spirit. So I will share with you today, during our session, about the work I do as a chaplain. And I'll share it with you in a way I hope you can see the nuances of what we call spiritual care in palliative care, in a way that you will see it not simply as an approach for a spiritual care professional, but how we all in this room, whether you are a doctor or a nurse or a social worker or an aide, we can all attend to the spirit of our patients. And we are actually all doing this whether we know it or not. So the question before us is, how can we best honor the spirit of our patients? Spiritual care or spirituality is commonly assumed to mean religious care or care via religion or religious traditions. And by religious traditions, we mean like some organizing set of principles that or beliefs or practices that are shared by a group of people, and we often think of those things as part of a church. And in its most common form, for example, this would be like the serving of communion by a pastor, or having a priest come and provide the sacrament of the anointing of the sick. And I do not want to spend time talking about the different approaches of spiritual care for different traditions. I think you'll figure this out over time as needed if you will remember a primary principle in dealing with people from a faith system different than your own, or a belief system different than your own, or a culture different than your own. And it's this: be curious, remembering that you are not there to change a person's mind about what they've believed their entire life and what has served them for good or for bad. You are not there to persuade them toward your own belief system. You're there to attend to who they are and to be curious about who they are, and ask questions like, how has your belief system supported you in your life? How has your belief tradition prepare you for your final days, years, or hours? And via curiosity, we can support a person's spirit. I once had a day where I received a phone call from an evangelical lady who had been disconnected from her faith tradition since she was a child. So I was a little surprised by the call. And she says, "I am going to die in 3 days." And I said, "Oh, you are?" She said, "Yes." And it is important to me, now that I know this, that I want to reconnect with my childhood faith before I die. And so I helped her. And believe it or not, 3 days later, exactly, she died. I drove down the road from her home to meet for the first time an indigenous American who had rejected his tribe traditions for most of his adult life. He was separated from his family, so he had no ties familially, and he was disconnected from his tradition. And now, facing the final months of his life, he wanted my support to somehow become reconnected to his tribal traditions, which were all of a sudden important to him. But this required me to get very curious. And then I drove down the road to meet a lady who has cancer, and her husband. They were lifelong Buddhists, and I had never had the privilege of sitting and learning from Buddhists before. And so I sat at their feet for more than 2 hours, and I got to learn how their belief system had supported them in their life and how they found it supporting them as she neared the end of her life now. And this is what I call attending to a person's spirit. And most people or religions attempt to define spirit. They try to define that something about a person that's somehow bigger than the body that they inhabit, that thing that carries personality, that has been informed by the culture of their upbringing, the environment of their upbringing, or even the imprinting that they have received from their immediate family. And if religion is an organized set of beliefs, spirituality could be identified as more of a personal, individual journey that centers on a person's sense of peace or of purpose. And in this way, spiritual considerations become appropriate even when a patient or a family says that they have little to no interest in religion. And that does not dissuade me. It does not distract me from my ability to give spiritual care to them. And I've discovered over the years that my most memorable and meaningful relationships that I've developed in spiritual care that I've provided have come and been developed with those who would call themselves irreligious, or maybe even claim atheism. So I find it helpful to take a broad view of spirituality. I believe that it's a view that I believe draws each one of us, regardless of our training, regardless of our area of expertise, into the spiritual care of our patients. Because what if we were to consider as spiritual anything that impacts the spirit of a person, with the subsequent belief that care is needed where something is impacting negatively the spirit of a person, or the care is needed where something has negatively impacted the spirit of a person. So regardless of your role, job, position, caring for the spirit of a person is something you can do, and it's not just for the chaplain like me or even of the social worker. And we know that our patients are unique. And so this is how I approach patients. It's essential for me to meet my patients with no agenda, which means that I do not approach my patients with a desire to evangelize them or to proselytize them toward a specific belief system. I don't approach them with a desire to say anything to them. I do not meet them with the assumption that they would want me to pray for them. Simply put, I do not approach my patients with my own plan for them. Instead, I get to know them. And when I meet a patient, I lower myself to their eye level or below. So if they're lying in their bed, I may pull up a chair so that I am eye level with them, or I will kneel next to them so that I am looking at them or up at them. Or if they're in their wheelchair, I will approach at eye level. And when I do this, this signifies to them that this visit is uniquely different than typical visits by healthcare professionals. Doctors come in and they stand over the patient and they're talking down to the patient, and nurses come in and they're usually tasked to provide certain cares, and they have to manipulate and turn and do things to the patient. And I have the privilege of being the soft one, right? The one who comes in differently. And so I'll slide up to a person eyeball to eyeball at their level, and I'll ask them as early as possible, how are you today? Or how are you in this moment? Or are you experiencing pain? Are you at ease? Are you comfortable? Is there anything that you need? What is your pressing need in this moment? And allow me to address that for you to the best of my ability first. And if the patient or family can see my care for them in their obvious pain, they may eventually begin to share with me the less obvious sources of pain. In other words, they may begin to share with me the significant stories of their life. And I've learned over the years to listen for emotional or spiritual pain in their stories. But when pain gets addressed, all of a sudden, their physical pain gets addressed and comfort gets addressed, we can often see a person's spirit or life force begin to reemerge. The sudden lack of pain or decrease of physical pain allows the mind of the patient to begin to focus on meaningful conversations or meaningful memories. The decreasing of a patient's pain may create the space for what might appear or seem to be more overt spiritual work, where relationships get mended, or forgiveness can be expressed, or possibly for a patient to breathe deeply for the first time in years. Occasionally, we'll even see emotional states or improved emotional states or improving relationships actually begin to diminish a person's physical pain. And sometimes, however, the greatest spiritual work to be done is just the relief of a patient's symptoms or pain. So emotional pain, relational pain can impact the spirit of a person negatively. Over the years, I've come to see spiritual care and emotional care as one and the same. Spiritual care equals emotional care. Good emotional care equals good spiritual care. So when I have the opportunity to hear a person's story, this is what we refer to as life review. Marcella will speak to us about that later. I have learned to listen for pain in people's stories. And it may be a pain that appears simply as dreams unfulfilled. It may be a religious pain associated with negative experience in a church or associated with a church. It might be abuse. It might be from difficult family relationships. And later today, we will talk some about how to provide audience to people's stories, even if those stories are full of pain? How do we companion people in their emotional pain? And I often have this experience. I arrive at a home to meet a person who's nearing the end of their life, and the family says to me, well, he or she isn't talking anymore. Good luck. They have not spoken for days. And so I go in and I sit down and I meet with this individual, and via gentle curiosity, that patient starts to talk. And they become animated when they realize that I'm truly interested in their story or specific meaningful stories to them. And families have often stopped remembering together. They stop rehearsing the stories of the life that they've shared together. And I come in, and the patient I discover actually wants, if at all possible, to rehearse those stories. The rehearsal of those stories is actually giving life to their spirit, even while their body is losing its energy. As I've been preparing for this, I shared the other day with a friend what I would be talking about. And he said, well, what I hear you saying is this: people who are nearing the end of their life often have things to say. And the question is, who is listening?